Hi friend, welcome back to the Our Daily Bread Kitchen. It has been a very busy start to the school year, but I finally got a chance to get in the kitchen for about 12 hours, maybe 11, 12, I can't really remember now, a couple of weekends ago, and I thought I would take you along and show you the things I got to play with in my kitchen. The first thing I did that morning was make butter and then a iced matcha latte, which if you saw my butter making video, you know I almost always make a latte right after making butter because who's going to waste all of that goodness in the blender. Then I got right to mixing up some spice mixes. I needed a sausage mix refill and also a taco spice mix refill, and I can type out those recipes for you. And then I made about 10 pounds worth of turkey sausage, breakfast sausages, and it took a while. It took about a couple of hours, but I just made them in batches on the stovetop and then flash froze them in batches on a tray. And when I was done with all of that, I froze them all in my little extreme freeze containers. The day before this, I had taken out about 11 pounds of ground beef from the freezer to thaw, and then this morning I had went ahead and got the roaster, the big roaster pan out, and was working on cooking up that ground beef, and then I ended up canning most of it. And then I had also started a big batch of broth because the goal on this day was to make as much room in the freezer as possible. And so I had taken out all of our veggie scraps like onion peels and garlic peels and, carrot scraps, celery scraps, things like that that I save up in the freezer to make broth with. And I had taken all of that out and gotten that going in the Instant Pot. I actually ended up making 2 batches of broth that day, bone broth, and canning 2 batches of broth. Here I'm showing you in between every few batches of making that turkey sausage because I had put maple syrup in it. It was getting a little sticky, so I had to stop and clean the pan 1 or 2 times. And the way I clean my cast iron is I just throw some water on the pan and leave the stove on, and I just let the water, as it starts to boil, it releases all of the stuck on stuff on its own, and I just scrape it away and I'll rinse it off and dry it really well and throw it back on the stove for all the water to evaporate. And it's almost as good as new. This pan is very used and very old, but it looks great after getting it cleaned. Here are the clean jars I had thrown in the dishwasher that morning because I knew I was going to be canning a lot. This is the ground beef, the taco meat that I canned. I can't remember now, but I think I ended up getting, 7 quarts of canned ground beef on my shelf. And then since I had the roaster out already, I went ahead and diced or shredded, you'll see in a second, all of the onions that I had been saving for the last couple of months, and I went ahead and caramelized those and threw it into the freezer as meal prep. Here are the onions, and then I think I also ended up shredding some cheese. That day I try to get at least 1 or 2 blocks of cheese shredded a week and just store it in the fridge for that week, and we'll use it in quesadillas or sandwiches or pizzas or whatever we need it for. The next thing I did after this was make an egg bake with some of the ground beef that I had made that morning, that taco ground beef, and then a bunch of eggs, and I put it all in that bowl and I baked it at 375 for about 30 minutes. I think I ended up doing it a little bit longer since I used a glass bowl. If you didn't know, when you bake something in a glass, it generally takes a few extra minutes than what the recipe calls for. So I think I ended up doing about 35 or maybe 40 minutes on the egg. By this time, all of my canned beef was done, so I loaded up the canner again with the first batch of broth, and somewhere in the middle here, my second batch of broth was done in the Instant Pot, so I went ahead and poured it into jars, and at some point here, you'll see me loading up the canner with the second batch of broth. So a lot of canning was done that day, which is great. Here's all the caramelized onions that were done in the roaster, and I got them all into containers, and the rest of the turkey sausages were all put in containers and labeled. I think we ended up getting about 13 breakfasts worth of breakfast sausage, which was a huge blessing. At some point during the day, I had taken out even more ground beef from the freezer, and I wasn't quite sure what to do with that. So I just took a break from cooking and cleaned out my freezer and wiped it down and rearranged some of the containers. I had made more tea, and so I like to freeze extra tea and keep them in the freezer, and then I can just add a cube or two to hot water during the week. That way I don't have to make a fresh batch of tea every single time. That was the second batch of broth that you saw me getting out, and then here I'm washing the canned beef jars because I had forgotten to put vinegar in the canner before I started the canner, and so it leaves, since we have hard water, it leaves a little bit of residue on the outside of the jar. So I just like to wash them up so they look pretty on the shelf. It feels so good to have shelf stable meat when I'm in a pinch and I don't have anything planned or prepped that day. I can just grab a jar of shredded chicken or ground beef and come up with some sort of a meal for that day, and it's such a blessing. Here's that second batch of broth being done, and then I ended up making meatballs with the rest of the ground beef that I had taken out, and Mr. Muscles helped me get all of that broth downstairs because those were quite heavy. And then I stored all of the meatballs. I flash froze them and then stored them all in my now clean freezer. I love using these containers. I got most of them on Buy Nothing. People are very happy to give away their plastic containers, and I love it because I don't have to pay for something I use in the freezer. And they work really well as long as I label everything, because everything looks alike in there. This giant cookie dough container cracks me up. It doesn't actually have chocolate chip cookie dough. It has chocolate chip protein bars. I make a double batch every time I make these, which makes quite a bit, but this container is big enough to fit all of that in, so that's what I like to use. The next thing I did was make some French toast. I had a little bit of bread leftovers, so I just went ahead and made a big batch of French toast, and we actually ended up snacking on that the rest of the week, so that worked out really well. You briefly see my little buddy there. He's always hanging out with me in the kitchen because it doesn't matter what I'm doing. He does not care and just wants to hang out with Mama. The next thing I did was make a big batch of rice, and I like to freeze rice when I make it into these little freezer cubes, which just makes it really easy. When I need a quick meal, I can grab a cube or two out and go ahead and steam it in the Instant Pot, and it's perfect every time. I forgot to show you, but I did have the rice soaking in apple cider vinegar most of the day until right before I cooked it, and I actually wrote a soaking and sprouting guide, and it's over on my blog. I'll go ahead and link that. And since I had a ton of rice and meat left over, I went ahead and made a bunch of burritos for my husband for work during the week, and then made some granola bars and pancakes. So all of this was in between mom life. Anyway, thanks for hanging out with me. I was excited to share my big kitchen day with you, which I love being in the kitchen and spending the day in here to make it easier the rest of the week. Days like this are far and few between, but what a blessing they are to our family. Anyway, thanks for spending your time with me. God bless.